but welcome to our session today, Parenting Under Pressure, Supporting Caregivers on the Front Lines. This webinar is brought to you by MHA and Arizona State University, and I will be moderating. My name is Jackie Zimmerman. I'm the manager of Public Education Partnerships and e-learning at Mental Health America's national office, and I'll be helping to guide our conversation with our fantastic panelists today. I have just a few notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed out to everyone who registered within 1 week. We currently do not offer CEUs, but we do provide certificates of attendance. I'll put the link to request your certificate in the chat in just a minute here. We will also include that link in the follow-up. So if for some reason you can't grab it out of the chat, don't worry, it will be coming to you soon. We might have some time at the end for some Q&A with our audience. So as our speakers are sharing, if you have questions for them, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try and get to a few of those at the end. We are super grateful for our panelists here today in a really important topic. As you know, when we come together with Arizona State University, we're often talking about how do we support parents, how do we support caregivers, and today specifically, we're going to be talking about those parents and caregivers that are working those kind of frontline jobs where they might be experiencing additional stress, additional pressure, and then how to handle that at home and balance all things parenting, caregiving, and really being a provider at work in so many other ways. We know that that comes with a unique set of challenges and a unique set of solutions. So we're going to be here today to talk about some of those. With us, we have three incredible speakers. I would love to introduce our panelists. We have Leah O'Brien, who's the Director of Behavioral Health at First Responders Foundation. Welcome, Leah. We also have Nicole Goebel, Director of Community Initiatives at Caregiver Action Network. Welcome, Nicole. And we have Matt Blush, retired law enforcement and parent and support provider to those who have been in similar positions as Matt. So welcome, speakers. We are so grateful to have you here today, each with your unique perspective and advice for this community. We're really grateful to have you here. I'd love to start. I know I gave like a name and a title, which only says so much, but I'd love for our audience to get to know a little bit more about you, about your background and your connection to today's topic. So if we can just do a round of introductions, anyone can pop off mute and kick us off.
Good afternoon. I guess I'll start. Thank you very much for the introduction. Silly, I need to pull up notes here, but keeping my head on straight. My name is Matt Blush, and I am recently retired. I retired in June after 26 years of service in law enforcement in the San Francisco Bay Area, out in Northern California. So my wife and I have been together for over 30 years. We have raised two amazing kids. They are now 26 and 29, and both thriving as adults. But we went through it as we were raising them. I've also been on the other side of this conversation. I am the son of a police officer. My dad worked for San Francisco Police, and he was killed in the line of duty when I was 13. So it brings another different, unique perspective and scary reality to a first responder family. So that's some of the experience that I bring to the table today.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, I can go. So my name is Leah O'Brien. I am the Director of Behavioral Health with the First Responders Foundation in Omaha, Nebraska. I am primarily what I do is I do a lot of therapy. I primarily see first responders. I also see spouses and kids, depending on what age they are. So I also do a lot of training, do a lot of peer support training, sleep recovery training, mental health and substance use, resiliency, suicide prevention, you name it, probably have done it. Personally, I grew up the daughter of a firefighter, so he is now happily retired. And then I'm currently married to a firefighter who works in Council Bluffs, Iowa. So that's kind of my connection to the first responder world. But just a typical, like, went to college for psychology and then just found my niche working with first responders. So that I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Leah. Happy to
Yeah.
have your perspective today. And Nicole.
Yeah. So I'm Nicole from Caregiver Action Network, and we serve the over 105 million family caregivers in the US. And that is a conservative number because we know not a lot of people raise their hand to say that they are caregivers. And so we work a lot with obviously folks who are caring for older loved ones, but also folks who are caring for children with significant health needs. And we also work with those that are balancing caregiving and work. And this includes those frontline workers as well. We have specialized content for balancing work and caregiving, and we also work with employers. I'm not directly connected to kind of frontline workers in my personal life, but I am someone who was born with a rare disease, and so my mom, being a single parent, had to balance work and caregiving, which can add up to a lot of stress. And then when you add on the unique challenges that come with being a frontline worker, that stress can multiply. So very excited to be here.
Thanks, Nicole. And thank you to all of our panelists. We're really grateful that you could join us here today. We're going to dive right into our discussion because there's a lot that we can talk about here today. But first, I just kind of want to talk about, from your perspective, what are some of those unique stressors that you see frontline caregivers face, or maybe that you've experienced that most impact mental health?
I can start with that one. The unique stressors, boy, there are so many. So I figure I'll go with some personal examples here. Having the conversation with my wife and with my kids about when we go to the grocery store and when we go to a restaurant, having a signal that, if I say a certain word, if I tell them a certain thing, they need to leave and go to the car right away, because it could be someone that I've encountered on the street. It could be, I noticed something going on because I carried that hypervigilance on duty. I never got rid of it off duty. I'm always scanning the room, looking for everything. So that's a unique dynamic, and always being on. It's almost hard to connect with your family because we're sitting at a restaurant trying to have a nice family dinner, and I'm just looking and trying to see what's going on. One of the other big stressors, the second example that I want to use, because this has hit us recently, is when there's an emergency. So we have wildfires in California, and where I'm at on the eastern edge of the Bay Area, they're right there. And so we've had a couple situations where the wildfire's coming and we're in an evacuation zone, and my wife is having to get things ready in the house and all that, but I have to go to work. I have to go help respond to this emergency for the community. I can't say, sorry, no, sorry, I can't come in. I have to go help pack up my house, because, we all live in that community. So that just brings a whole nother level of stress that's really only come on in the last few years. 2017 is really when those started. But that's rough, having to make that decision between being the caregiver and looking after the safety of my family, but then not being able to do that and having to hand over that responsibility, because now I have to go over and be the caregiver and safety provider for the whole community.
Yeah, I would
That's it.
absolutely mirror what Matt said. Just the unique stressors that first responders go through on a day-to-day basis. Whenever I'm doing trainings, I try the best that I can to resonate with first responders, but at the same time, I've really never seen the type of trauma that they would call a Tuesday, or a Wednesday. And so I try and hold space for them. So I would say that trauma for sure is probably the biggest impact that I see as a therapist, as a significant other of a first responder as well. Just the amount that they see over and over again. The lack of sleep is huge. And kind of like what Matt said too, there really is no choice to not respond. So another unique challenge, I guess, personally in my family is that my husband is also on the urban search and rescue team. And so the floods in Texas a couple of months ago, I was at work. Our 2.5-year-old was at daycare, and I get a text and he says, "I'm being deployed to Texas." And that is a 2-week minimum stay. So it's kind of like okay, guess I'll see you when I see you. And the whole family dynamic shifts. We are very, very privileged to be able to have family around us that can pick up so I can still go to work, and the kiddo can still go to daycare and hang out with them. But yeah, it's kind of a shift and move all the time.
Now, I would just kind of add on to both what Leah and Matt have, I think, picked up on, which is, as a parent, you're constantly kind of juggling different roles and responsibilities. And when you are, a frontline worker, there's a lot of unknowns. And I think, especially if you are factoring in caring for someone with, you know, more significant support needs, there's a lot more planning that needs to happen as part of that. Matt, you were talking about, if there's a wildfire, having to be able to, pack up and move your family. But if you were caring for someone that has those advanced support needs, there's a different level of planning that can go into that as well. Where are you going to be able to access the kind of medical support that you may need? DMEs or durable medical equipment. How do you make sure that you are, relocating to a place that is going to be feasible for that? If you have loved ones who have pulmonary or lung issues and you're dealing with a wildfire, that simple transition to a different space can have a lot of challenges. And if you have to be away, to kind of what Leah was talking about, when you're adding in a lot of those advanced support needs, to then shift that all to the responsibility of one parent can feel very overwhelming. And it can feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to have to call in a lot of additional support. And sometimes that support isn't there. There isn't family that's nearby. There isn't that extended support network. And so it can be a real challenge to navigate all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those reflections. And I know you've all started to hit on this a little bit, but with those challenges that caregivers in these roles face, how then do we transition from work to coming home and parenting? And I know, Matt, you already started to mention that it's hard to turn off these parts of your brain that you are trained to have on. What does that specifically look like for parents and caregivers or other family members?
Oh, boy, it's a great question. And yeah, we're on at work, and that transition coming home, I had a hard time early on because I didn't know how to make that transition. At work, we're in control, and in law enforcement, we show up on a scene and we have to establish control. And, there's this use of force scale. So a 1 is walking through the door, a 2 is, raising your voice, and then up to a 10, which would be having to use lethal force on someone. And so at work, we go back and forth on that scale in order to accomplish things. Well, when we come home, that use of force scale is not the same. If we come home, if I come home and I yell, I'm at what I think is like a level 2, but to my family, that's a 10 because they don't see that. So it's being able to break through that and understand the difference. I was in an assignment when I had a take-home vehicle, and so there really wasn't that transition from work to home, and I lived 11 minutes from work, so I didn't have a commute to decompress. So I got into a habit. My wife and I, we started talking about this in the communication. My habit was when I come through the door, I'll say hello, but um, I need 5 minutes to go into our room. Let me take off my uniform, take a breather, and when I come out in my shorts and a t-shirt, like they know that I've had that decompression, and that's the deal is when that stuff comes on and I come out, that's when I am like, for me, I'll step out when I'm ready, and then we can have that conversation, and we can engage because it's tough just walking through the door and the kids are excited and they run up and they want to see me and the dog's excited and she's jumping around and there's just so much going on. But all of that starts with communication with your partner and being self-aware, so that you can make that transition in your head of, okay, I'm not a cop anymore. I'm not a firefighter anymore. The uniform's off. I have to be dad. I have to be husband now, or mom, wife. And we need to make that distinction in our own head. That's a conversation that we have with ourselves.
Yeah, I really like what Matt has talked about in terms of kind of, the juggling of roles. One thing that we always say about caregivers is that they wear many hats, but caregiving is 24/7. It can happen at any point in time. If you're a parent, a kid can get sick and need to go to the ER at any point in time. Life happens on the clock. And it really is about, setting up supports for you as a caregiver to be able to like have that space to put on that parenting uniform, to take that time to kind of decompress, because especially if you are providing care for someone who has advanced needs, you're going from one kind of level of stress to potentially another. You've been working in a high stress um, situation. Perhaps something traumatic has occurred during your shift, and now you have to go home and provide, some kind of care to a loved one, to your child. And being able to kind of switch modes and, um, you know, not allow kind of that stress to pile on is challenging. And so being able to start identifying those pieces, I think, is really crucial and is a challenge for, I think, a lot of parents as well, to be able to do that. I mean, even if you're not in a frontline job, when you get home, you don't always have the ability to shut off from a very stressful day. And so when you're adding in those factors, it can be a little bit more intense. And so it's just so much more crucial, I think, to take that space.
Yeah, and to give, the typical therapist perspective is that healthy communication is absolutely number one. Really all of this is what a therapist or, someone who works with first responders would refer to as homecoming habits. So what happens when I walk in the door? Something like Matt said, yeah, it can be very mindless to just strip yourself of your uniform and then throw something else on and get the kids to school, but it does take a lot of that cognitive work up here. It's not just stripping off my uniform, it's taking off what this means. I'm no longer officer, I'm no longer firefighter, I'm no longer dispatcher or corrections or EMS or doctor or nurse, whatever that looks like. Now I am mom, dad, son, anything like that. So a lot of therapy looks like, and healthy communication, and what do homecoming habits mean to you when you're when you're a firefighter or a corrections officer or a law enforcement officer. Sometimes it's taking a shower, like literally cleansing yourself from the night or the day, or whatever area that you were working in, and whatever you got into. So yeah, but like Nicole said too, sometimes that's not very convenient. My husband and I have a 2.5-year-old together. Others have kids that need to get to school, so sometimes it's okay, I'm here, everybody load up in the car, and before I can even take my uniform off, let's get them to school. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love your point, Leah, about communication, and even Matt demonstrating that so wonderfully through, letting his partner know when I walk in the door, I'll say hello, then I have my time, really communicating what you need is so important. And in the role of, and as we're on this topic of communication, a lot of times these jobs that you're in that are high impact don't leave much room for you to say no. You are on, you're saying yes, you're responding, you're doing what you need to do in the moment to help others. And so that saying no is not something that you might feel like you can do very often. What are some realistic ways that caregivers can set boundaries while still meeting those demands of their jobs?
I mean, one of the things that we talk about with all caregivers is going back to what's already kind of been covered is communication. We talk a lot about the care team, right? Because you can't provide care on your own. Whether you're caring for someone with significant healthcare issues, an older loved one, or a child, um, you really can't do it in a bubble. There's the phrase, it takes a village, right? And it takes a village to provide that care. So having that care team and having communication is a really key piece of being able to set boundaries and being able to say, like, hey, I'm not, this week I have X going on. Maybe it is something happening at work where things are going to be very high stress, and you're just not going to have that ability to shift gears. Calling in some of that support to say, hey, I am going to need all hands on deck here for this week, or whatever the time frame is. And sometimes that can be difficult because caregivers want to do everything themselves, right? Like we want to wear that superhero cape, but we just can't. We can't do it all. So calling in that team, communicating with them what your needs are, advocating for your needs, including those boundaries to say, like, hey, I'm not going to be able to do X because I have this going on. Or, bringing in that support is so important.
I think with boundaries, you really have to know what's happening within your body and within your mind as well. Sleep deprivation and sleep loss looks different to everybody. And sometimes first responders don't recognize that they have sleep loss or sleep deprivation. They just feel that they are functioning at a level that's just going to work for them. So recognizing, okay, what's happening within me? Am I feeling a lot more irritable than normal? A lot more angry? Am I getting sick for no reason at all? And I know that this is a question for later. I think we talk about burnout a little bit later. So these are all the same answers that I would answer for that. But I also think a great example of knowing your boundaries too is overtime. So with first responders, overtime can be very, very coveted, especially, if it's a more quote unquote fun gig for officers. A concert is in town, or parade or whatever. It's easy money, but again, that takes you away from home. With firefighters, especially my husband, they have 24-hour shifts, and so he does do a pretty good job at asking, hey, what's going on this weekend or whatever? And, can I take overtime? Should I take overtime? And it's really hard for me to say no too, because again, it is easy money. Especially if he's on a quote unquote easier rig or a better area of town. But sometimes a boundary is really saying no to overtime. And I know that that's really not convenient in every single department. Corrections officers have mandated overtime. So, if you say no, then you're getting written up. So I know that, again, that's not always the case in some departments, but know your limits for yourself, but also know, what does the family need at home?
Yes, 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 yes. Those boundaries we have to set with ourselves. And it's it's hard because sometimes that overtime money is nice. Uh, a lot of times, especially when we're early on in the career and we have younger families, like when I was a young cop and I had young kids, um, I man, the excitement of this job, and I'm trying to impress my supervisors. And so if the sergeant says, "Hey, someone called in sick, do you want to stay for overtime?" Yeah, I may not want the overtime. I might be saying yes just because I'm trying to fit in and I want to be part of the team and I want to feel like I'm helping out. Um, the money's nice with overtime, but we can get sucked into a trap also because now we keep working all of this overtime and we start becoming reliant on that money, and then we need the money, and all that time we're working the overtime, we're not at home. And so the boundaries, I had to create boundaries with myself. I had to make sure that my wife and I were living within our financial means so that I didn't have to have the overtime. But also, I had to get over myself and realize that, I don't have to please everybody all the time, and I have to be able to say no to overtime. If the kids have a game, if there's something going on, I can't be the one to take that hit and every time be the one that takes the overtime, whether it's because I want the money or the rush or the affirmation or whatever it is. Uh, my priorities have to be at home. And that's a conversation that no one had with me when I first started. Uh, like seriously, um, the boundary that I set, I sell the city 40 hours a week of my time. And what's that extra time worth? Because like the kids don't care what the reason is that I'm not there. They just know that I'm not there. And yes, there will be times when literally there is a fire coming over the hill and we're going to have to evacuate the city. So we might be so short staffed that we have to mandate the overtime, but those instances are actually few and far between. So we can't say yes to everything. And it's a conversation that we also, again, communication, common theme here, having that communication with our spouse and understanding where the limits are. If there's a vacation coming up and maybe we need some extra money and there's an opportunity, great. But just because Dave's next on the overtime list and he doesn't really want to work it, and so I'm just going to do it to help him out, and I'll catch James's game tomorrow, or I'll catch the kids' game next week. Like now the kids are sitting there. It doesn't matter why the chair's empty. That chair's empty that you're not sitting in. And yeah, family first.
Thanks for that perspective and sharing personally too, Matt. It's really important and it's hard when you get caught up. And I think we're in a society that likes us to say yes. But at the same time that you're saying no to the overtime or to the extra work, you're saying yes to your family. And that's such a beautiful reminder too. I want to talk a little bit about what resources and tools are most helpful for individuals who are in these high stress roles, maybe experiencing those heightened levels of stress and anxiety throughout your shift, maybe witnessing some trauma on a daily basis. When you come home, I know someone in the chat too had asked, what if you can't remove the stressors of coming home? What if you're still carrying that work stress as you enter your house? And how do you if you can't shift from environment? That's really where this extra support and finding those coping skills and tools are really important. So I'd love to just hear from each of you. Kind of what are those resources that you have found most beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, I think that peer support is always key. You want to hear from folks that understand where you're coming from. And with caregivers, oftentimes it's someone that isn't part of their care team, let's say. It's other caregivers, it's support groups. It's things like that because, we may not always feel comfortable being able to talk about how we're feeling about certain things with family and friends, even if they are near and dear to us, of course, we may feel uncomfortable. And so being able to have that peer support is crucial because you can also learn so much. You can learn how other people have navigated some of the challenges you're experiencing. And one of the key things is that it's validating. You don't have to feel like you're alone when you're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, when you've experienced something that is traumatic or at that high level of stress. You have someone that understands where another family member or a friend may not be able to understand that perspective. So I think, peer connections, peer supports are so important because it just gives both that different lens to kind of the validation and being able to share experiences.
Yeah, I second that peer support. Having the ability to have a conversation with someone who has walked in those shoes. They've walked the path, so they know it. That was huge for me. For a long time, I thought I was the only one going through the stuff that I was going through, experiencing what I was experiencing. Because I grew up in the profession at a time where we didn't talk about anything. We didn't talk about our stuff, and we didn't talk to anybody else. But we've gotten much better about that. Um, I went through a lot of stress related to the job and family stuff and everything else. Found myself in a situation where I needed a lot of help. And when I finally had to ask for help, it was peers that were there that got me through it. And with the help, I found a culturally competent clinician, which was key. Someone who kind of understood the first responder culture. And having a counselor to bounce things off of really helped. And for me personally, I kind of got outside the agency, and I found that 12-step groups actually helped for some of the things in my situation, and just a whole lot of power there. Um, those and having a good, healthy social circle outside of work. It's easier to process that stuff if you can step out of it. And stepping out of it doesn't mean just stepping away from work, because if you're at a barbecue on the weekend and it's all people from your shift, now we're all just sitting around, and it tends to be where we go to the negativity. So we're sitting around, we're talking about work, we're talking about that negativity, or we're reliving all of the bad calls. That's not a healthy social circle. It's a social circle. But if I'm getting together with folks and, I'm learning from my teacher friends and they're talking about their week, and, my friends in different industries and engineers, and they're talking about their thing, and, we're out hiking and kayaking and biking, it keeps that perspective in my life, and I don't get drowned by the trauma and the negativity and all the other stuff at work. So all of those really play a key role.
Yeah, I mean, nothing that hasn't already been said. He obviously going to be a huge proponent of therapy, especially if you feel like you can't shake things. And sometimes home just isn't the place to be able to share some of that stuff with your spouse. I obviously, being a therapist for first responders, being married to one, my husband can generally tell me really anything that he has encountered. Obviously, some stuff is going to hit a little bit harder than not, but I mean, again, I'm in a privileged place where, yeah, I hear, I've probably heard it before, so you can talk to me about it, but there's a lot of spouses out there who have a really hard time holding space for their first responders who just went on a child call or a SIDS call or a terrible, gruesome suicide. So yeah, if you feel like at home is not the place where you can feel free to talk about it, then absolutely peer support, therapy. And the key there, yes, is getting involved with someone who is culturally competent, so you don't have to go through the framework and the groundwork of, you know, what does this acronym mean or what does this rig mean and all of that, and just making sure you already know someone who's trauma informed, probably has experience or knowledge in the trauma modalities such as EMDR, brain spotting, somatic processing, things like that. So yeah, I would say, I mean, there's a whole spectrum of resources out there. Zoom support groups, like peer support groups, spouse support groups, yeah, online substance support groups, and then your own peer support departments, and then therapy. And then getting even further than that, there's various first responder specific retreats and treatment centers should somebody need something a little bit more intense than anything else. But the resources are out there. Sometimes they're a little bit harder to find, but yeah.
And I would just add on, because I know that there has been some back and forth about support groups in the chat, which is really wonderful. You know, there's a lot of different support group options out there too. I know that someone mentioned being in a small town, and I grew up in a small town in Iowa. So I definitely can understand and relate that, you know, you kind of always feel like you're under a microscope. Um, you know, it's kind of like my mom would find out what I had been up to before, you know, anyone else. And so it can feel like you don't have that privacy, but you know, now, especially because everything is so connected and so virtual, there's a lot of different options, and this speaks to therapy too. We have a lot of resources that walk caregivers through, like, what exactly are you looking for, um, so that you can be kind of matched with what is going to work best for you. Because even if you want a support group in a lot of rural communities, there may not be that full stop. And so how do you get connected to those resources when they're not just, you know, out the door?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for uplifting that, Nicole. Sometimes those online spaces can feel a little more safe if you're in a community where showing up in person or that someone will see you somewhere, and that fear, it can be really hard. There's still a lot of stigma present, but making sure that you're finding that support in ways that feel safe to you is really important. I know we had talked a little bit, and Leah had started to give us some information just about, you know, that overwhelm of stress and hitting on the word burnout. But I think burnout is something I want to dive a little deeper into and give some time for our speakers to all be able to address too. These are roles where burnout can happen quickly and intensely, and because you have to be so on and present in ways that you all have discussed, it's hard to turn off. And our bodies, our mind cannot keep up with that pace of life at a consistent level. And we're bound to hit that burnout if you are taking on the extra shifts, if you're not finding those ways to decompress or cope with your stress. And a lot of times, because you're in a unique role where you are experiencing heightened levels of stress, maybe on a daily basis, it might be kind of hard to know, is this normal stress for my job, or is it hitting that next level of burnout? I'd just love to hear from each of you and your experience. What signs do people maybe miss that are indicating that they might be in a level of burnout where they do need extra support?
I can start with that one. That's so, and I'll just go on my personal experience because I was there and I didn't realize I was getting there. So it wasn't quick onset for me. There was no acute, here we are, but the cumulative aspects of the job and the trauma experienced at work and you know, before I was on the job and everything else, it was a slow boil. And it just, you know, being the frog in the slow boil, I didn't realize that the temperature was getting warmer and warmer and warmer until until I finally was in a spot where I needed help and realized that I had isolated myself from everybody, my friends, my family, my coworkers. Like I needed someone to talk to and I didn't have anybody. In addition to that isolation and not having anyone, I was angry. Uh, I was checked out. Either I had no opinion on anything, or I was just angry about something. And those were pretty much my two emotions. If numb is an emotion, that was one, and anger was number two, and that was kind of it. I just didn't care anymore, and I didn't realize where I was at. So that burnout, I mean, until I was there, I couldn't see it. Now, if you talk to people that were close to me or had been close to me because I had pulled away, if you talk to my wife, she saw it long before I did. We just didn't communicate well at that time, which helped contribute to that. So it was one of the things that we got to rebuild. But it can be a slow boil, and that's even worse because part of that slow boil, I got to the point where, you know, I was having suicidal ideations and I couldn't tell anyone about it. And that was kind of like my first hint of, oh boy, these are dark thoughts and I shouldn't be having these thoughts. But then I couldn't tell anyone about them. But by the time we get to suicidal ideation, that's a scary step. That's pretty far down the scale. So yeah, it'd be good if we had people in our lives that could call us on that before we got to that point.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that burnout is a slow burn. When I teach any of the really any of the trainings that I train or present, I talk about burnout, and there really can be 4 levels of burnout, where this first level is really the person has no acknowledgement. They know that like something's just not right, but they're either ignoring it or there's no acknowledgement. They just keep going because it's the daily grind. And then level 2, level 3, level 4. Level 4 being that like true cynicism, jadedness, resentment for your department, for the people that you serve. You know, it just like you don't care about anything that you do anymore. And like Matt said, kind of that being affected at home as well, being much more quick to anger, and maybe the kids and the spouse kind of don't really want to be around you anymore. But I would say another kind of indicator of burnout that people fail to recognize is the somatic symptoms or the physical symptoms that, yeah, their neck hurts or their back hurts or they're sick for whatever reason. You know, they get the summer cold that doesn't make sense, but could be, hey, that might be some burnout going on. So yeah, taking care of yourself, all of the things that have everything to do or without the job. So family, friends, finances, fun, faith and spirituality. It's a lot that I teach to have a well-rounded life outside of the job.
Yeah, and I would just add, I completely agree with what's been said, that a lot of people don't recognize burnout until you're there. It's that slow accumulation of stressors that just you're not able to manage. And that is something that we always flag for caregivers, is that, you know, we all have stress. We all experience anger. We all experience sadness. But there's kind of a level of that is manageable from day to day. It doesn't make providing that care and support to a loved one more challenging. But when it becomes one of those things that you can't manage, that isn't going away, that is persistent, we always talk about, hey, maybe you need help. Maybe you need to talk to your healthcare providers. Maybe we can start talking about therapy options for you if these things are getting too difficult to manage on kind of that day-to-day basis, because you don't want to find yourself at that place of burnout because it's hard to take those steps back. Once you're there, you're kind of there, and it takes a lot of work to kind of get yourself back to kind of a manageable place. And the impacts that it can have on family, friends, and other relationships, as well as your health, those are just really, really difficult. So, the minute that you start to kind of flag like, I'm just feeling really overwhelmed, I'm feeling really stressed, I'm not able to just kind of take that few-minute break to kind of level off, that's when we start saying, okay, let's start building some things in to day-to-day kind of routines that make some of that a little bit easier.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. And Matt and Leah and Nicole, that's a good segue. It's important that we try to prevent ourselves from getting to that point of burnout. Sometimes it can happen, and there's no shame in that. You're in a high stress role where, it can easily happen to anyone. But how can we really think about building those communication channels ahead of time, those self-care techniques, those ways to keep ourselves in a good mentally healthy space to try to prevent ourselves from getting to that point of crisis? And so I'd love to hear from each of you, what are some of those steps or things that we can integrate self-care, time for yourself into already busy schedules? If you are in a high impact job, you're busy all the time. If you're a parent, then you come home, it's a second job, you're very busy. And a lot of times, caregivers, you're putting yourself last. You're taking care of someone else first. But in order to put that person first, you need to take care of yourself in those times too. So how can folks start to integrate self-care into those busy schedules?
Start with that one. So for me, self-care is self-discipline. I have to take care of myself, and I know this. I had to learn it. But just like the flight attendant says on the airplane, when the masks come down, you got to put yours on first before you take care of anybody else. We can't pour from an empty cup. I can't pour from an empty cup. So if I'm running around taking care of everybody else, then at some point my cup's empty, and then there I am at the burnout stage. For me, what that looks like, self-care, is maintaining my calendar. I calendar dates with my wife. I calendar trips with my kids. I calendar my exercise routine, the discipline of getting up in the morning and going for a run, going to the gym. When I put that stuff in my calendar, I'm more accountable to it. And, writing it down and sticking to my word, it makes me a better person, and it makes me stronger. Because in these high stress professions, as we talked about, it's easy to say yes to everything else and all of that. But if we look at ourselves, the question that I ask myself is, would I follow myself through the door when we're talking about, going through a door at work? At home, am I being the kind of dad that I needed when I was a kid? So that's, the question. Am I being the person that I needed when I was younger? And so in order to do that, that I stick to that calendar and hold those times, and it makes it a much easier to just, yeah.
I totally agree with the calendar. And I think one thing that helps folks do is not only be more accountable to themselves, but also that extended care team. If they do need, someone to come and hang out with uh, the kiddo while they go and do some time at the gym or whatever that respite looks like. Um, Having that on the calendar, making it part of the routine is so much easier because then it just becomes routine and you feel like you have that support already built in. I think a lot of the challenge too with caregivers is being able to rethink about what self-care is. Self-care is crucial to being a caregiver. Just like what we've talked about with the oxygen mask, you can't pour from an empty cup. And caregiving is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And if you are not taking care of yourself, if you are not maintaining your well being, both physically and mentally, as well as emotionally, then you're not going to be able to go that distance. You're going to find yourself in a place of not just burnout, but potentially needing care yourself. I mean, there's so much data out there that folks who are providing care, whether it's someone who's providing care for a child with significant healthcare needs, an older loved one, a spouse, there's, a toll physically and mentally and emotionally. And so you want to be able to support your loved one and, support yourself. So I think self-care can be tricky for caregivers to kind of make that switch in their minds about it's not selfish. Taking that time away isn't selfish. It's necessary so that you can continue to do your work as a caregiver, because caregiving is work.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that everyone has said, and even in the chat too. I've been keeping an eye on the chat as well. Yeah, calendar and maintaining your time, but sometimes it's simply like reprioritization of things. I mean, let's be honest, how many of us get home after a day of work and just kind of collapse onto the couch? And sometimes that is what we need, yes. But sometimes maybe we need to start prioritizing therapy, or maybe we need to start prioritizing sleep. That is a huge thing that I've really gotten into this year, is sleep recovery for first responders, and just how detrimentally affected every single organ in our body is when we don't get sleep. Leads to higher cancer rates, higher cardiovascular incidents, higher mental health needs. And like I said earlier, a lot of us can't recognize how much we don't have a good night of sleep before it's too late. And so what does sleep look like? Can we do a fun like bedtime routine of sleep where we all turn our devices off and we start reading, or we play, do a puzzle, kind of incorporating some of these things with your kids too. So, and I can get on a soapbox on sleep, of course, but I'll go back to therapy too. Like if there's just something that just not sitting right. I know that somebody said in the chat that self-care can be hard when we feel as though our body is in survival mode. And so talking with a therapist who does a lot of somatic experiencing or polyvagal therapy to help the client recognize when their body doesn't feel safe, and how to do some tips and tricks into activating that vagal nerve with cold therapy, with breath work, with exercise and movement, and just like trauma therapy as well, to get more onto some baseline functioning. So yeah, I think like Nicole said, self-care doesn't have to be selfish, and we have to sometimes put ourselves first. So
Absolutely. Thank you all. And I want to squeeze one more question, but I know we're right at the end of the time, so I'll restrain myself. But I want to uplift that last point. It's not selfish, it's necessary. And it is necessary. And you are deserving of that. Everyone is deserving of that time for themselves. And it's so important in order to be able to be there for your kids, for your family, for your partners, for your community, in all of those ways. And so thank you for those thoughts around self-care. I know it's such an important thing, and I want us to close on that note, that you're deserving of care, that support is out there. And I loved looking through the chat, seeing what different people were sharing that they do, because it's individual. What works for someone may not work for you, and that's okay. It's finding what support is best for you that meets your needs at that time. And it might shift throughout your lifetime too, as those needs adjust, as you're a parent and as your child grows older and as your priorities change and your time changes. So it's so important to do those check-ins of how am I doing with my self-care? What do I need right now in this time? Maybe what was working before isn't working anymore. That's okay. But I want to give a huge thank you to Leah, Matt, Nicole for joining us here, for sharing not only your incredible knowledge, but also your personal experiences. I know that takes vulnerability, and it's a lot to ask to come on and share in front of people, and you all did it so openly and beautifully. So thank you for spending this time with us today. And thank you to everyone who is joining. I've loved seeing everyone's comments and feedback in the chat, your questions, your resources you've been sharing. Thank you for sharing those and being here today. Just a reminder that it is being recorded. I know there were a few questions about that. It is being recorded. We'll email the recording out along with any helpful resources, links, and that request for your certificates of attendance. All of that will come in your follow-up email. You can expect that in the next week. But one final thank you to our speakers, to ASU for helping us put on this session today. I hope everyone takes some time on that note for themselves this afternoon, even if it's a quick little walk or a moment in sunshine, that you can take some time for yourself. And thank you, Leah, Matt, and Nicole. All right. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.